Ukraine has launched another unexpected attack. The Yaroslavl Oil Refinery, one of the facilities holding strategic importance within Russia's energy infrastructure, was targeted by Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles. According to the initial reports, a total of 19 drones were used in the attack wave. The targeting of the Yaroslavl Oil Refinery, one of the major facilities supplying fuel to Moscow and its densely populated surrounding regions, caused serious anger among Russian officials and the public. The strike demonstrated that energy facilities located far behind the front line can no longer be considered completely safe, and that the war is increasingly reaching deep into Russian territory. The pressure on Russia is now growing even further. So how will Russia continue its military operations after a significant number of its major refineries have suffered attacks, fires, maintenance shutdowns, or production interruptions? What kind of response will Russian President Vladimir Putin give to this latest strike? In their initial statements, officials announced that the attack was carried out during the morning hours, leaving one person dead and 4 others injured. Since the first day of the war, the number of casualties and injuries has continued to rise without interruption. The fact that industrial and energy regions located hundreds of kilometers away from the front line are now being directly targeted clearly reveals the new stage that the war has reached. In footage published by a Ukrainian-linked Telegram channel, one of the unmanned aerial vehicles can be seen moving at low altitude over an industrial zone. Moments later, the drone dives towards the target area and a powerful explosion occurs. The smoke and flames rising after the explosion strengthened claims that the attack may have been directed at one of the refinery's critical sections. The footage, which captured the attack second by second, also revealed the scale of the destruction experienced in the Yaroslavl region today. Although Russian authorities claimed that air defense units intercepted some of the drones, it appears that several aircraft from the attacking group still managed to reach the target area. This situation has once again raised questions about whether Russia's air defense systems, which are deployed across an extremely wide geographical area, can protect the front line, military bases, cities, and critical energy facilities simultaneously. The Yaroslavl Oil Refinery is known as Russia's 5th largest oil refinery in terms of processing capacity. The facility is reportedly capable of processing approximately 15.72 million metric tons of crude oil every year. This level of production makes the refinery more than just a regional industrial center. It is also one of the important components of Russia's wider fuel supply network. The gasoline, diesel, and other petroleum products manufactured at the facility are considered critical for civilian consumption, transportation, industrial production, and military logistics. Today's attack is believed to have been at least the 7th strike targeting the same refinery since the beginning of the year. The repeated attempts to hit the same facility suggest that Ukraine is not merely seeking to inflict one-time damage. Instead, it may be aiming to keep the refinery under constant pressure, increase security and maintenance expenses, and reduce its overall production capacity. Russian officials stated that they expected similar attacks to continue and warned that these operations would not remain unanswered. Although initial assessments claimed that the physical damage to the facility was more limited than expected, repeated attacks could still create serious gaps in Russia's fuel reserves and distribution planning. A temporary interruption at a single refinery may be compensated for within a limited period. However, if several facilities reduce production, undergo repairs, or slow down their activities for security reasons at the same time, the combined pressure could shift parts of the logistical balance in Ukraine's favor. Reports suggesting that Russia's fuel crisis is continuing to escalate have made this latest attack even more significant. According to Rostat data, the average price of 95-octane gasoline exceeded 100 rubles per liter in 7 regions, including annexed Crimea and Sevastopol. The number of regions where this level was exceeded reportedly almost doubled within the past week. This suggests that pressure on the fuel market may no longer be a temporary fluctuation. When reduced refinery production, increased transportation costs, regional supply problems, and the high consumption demands of the wartime economy are combined, further increases in gasoline prices across wider parts of the country may become unavoidable. Fuel shortages in regions near the front and in cities dependent on long-distance deliveries could directly affect the daily lives of civilians. Long queues at petrol stations, the unavailability of certain fuel types, and rapidly increasing prices demonstrate that the effects of the war are now being felt not only on the battlefield but also deep inside Russia. The Yaroslavl Oil Refinery, one of the important facilities supplying petroleum products to Moscow, Russia's capital and most heavily populated region, was reportedly targeted in a coordinated attack involving 19 unmanned aerial vehicles. Since the first days of the conflict between the two countries, numerous Russian refineries, fuel storage facilities, and elements of petroleum infrastructure have been attacked. During the early stages of the war, most of the targeted sites were located near the border. However, as Ukraine developed its long-range drone capabilities, strategic facilities situated much deeper inside Russia also entered the operational range of Ukrainian attacks. This development has caused Russia to experience occasional but significant difficulties in fuel processing and distribution, despite its position as one of the world's leading oil producers. Possessing large reserves of crude oil alone is not sufficient. That oil must be processed in refineries, converted into the necessary types of fuel, stored in secure facilities, and delivered to the required regions on time. Ukraine's campaign appears to be targeting precisely these vulnerable points within the chain. Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly acknowledged that losses within fuel reserves and the distribution network had occasionally made it difficult to meet demand and had resulted in long queues at petrol stations in several locations. Putin stated, "Unfortunately, there are queues at petrol stations. The required type of gasoline is not always available." This admission was considered an important development because it showed that the fuel problem was not limited to images shared on social media or complaints made by local residents. The issue had been recognized at the highest level of the Russian state. The fact that certain regions of Russia, one of the world's largest oil producers, are experiencing gasoline shortages clearly demonstrates the burden that the wartime economy is placing on the energy system. Russia's large-scale military operations consume enormous quantities of fuel. Tanks, armored vehicles, fighter aircraft, helicopters, logistical trucks, and missile systems all depend on a stable supply. When civilian consumption, industrial production, and agricultural activity are added to this demand, every reduction in refinery capacity can become a source of pressure felt across the country. Russia has restricted petroleum exports and introduced several measures in an attempt to reduce domestic shortages and preserve more fuel for the internal market. However, it is clear that these measures will not produce immediate results. The problem is not limited solely to the amount of fuel being exported. The security of refineries, access to replacement parts, the availability of technical personnel, the protection of transportation routes, and the defense of storage centers are also extremely important. Furthermore, there is no certainty that Ukrainian attacks will stop. On the contrary, it is believed that similar operations may continue against an even broader list of targets. The latest blow against a facility supplying Moscow generated widespread attention in the Russian press and among the public. Every attack affecting the supply system of the capital carries not only an economic message, but also a psychological and political one for the Kremlin. As the effects of the war move closer to Moscow, the public's sense of security may weaken, while questions may arise regarding whether the state is truly capable of protecting strategic installations deep inside the country. The strategy followed by Ukrainian military and intelligence units appears to be based on weakening Russia's enormous military power by targeting the critical systems that allow it to operate rather than attempting to destroy all of that power directly on the battlefield. Russia may possess large numbers of tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, fighter jets, and long-range missiles. However, all of these systems require uninterrupted supplies of fuel, ammunition, maintenance, and logistical support. For this reason, attacks against refineries should not be viewed solely as acts of economic sabotage. They are also military operations intended to indirectly reduce the operational capacity of the Russian armed forces. Less processed fuel could mean fewer moving tanks, fewer aircraft taking off, and slower military supply convoys. Russia undoubtedly possesses extensive reserves and alternative production facilities. However, even this enormous capacity may come under severe pressure if attacks are repeated regularly. Repair periods become longer and several facilities are disabled at the same time. Ukraine was prepared to sacrifice exactly 19 unmanned aerial vehicles during this attack. The model, technical specifications, and operational designations of the drones used have not yet been officially announced. However, some publicly available reports state that the UJ-26 Boba has been used by Ukraine for long-range missions since 2023 and has been linked to several attacks against targets inside Russia. The UJ-26 Boba is known as an effective unmanned aerial vehicle capable of carrying out long-range strikes, approaching target zones at low altitude, and damaging critical infrastructure with its explosive payload. The estimated cost of one aircraft is reportedly around $100,000. If all 19 drones involved in the attack were within a similar price range, the total cost of the unmanned aerial vehicles alone would reach approximately $1.9 million. At first glance, this may appear to be a significant loss for Ukraine. However, the shutdown of production, repair operations, improvements to security systems, firefighting efforts, disruptions to deliveries, and the activation of alternative supply routes could impose a much greater financial burden on Russia. This war, which directly or indirectly affects the entire world, continues to inflict its greatest damage on Ukraine and Russia. As the conflict continues, not only military casualties, but also infrastructure destruction, energy costs, production losses, and commercial damage are increasing. It has been alleged that the attack on the Yaroslavl Oil Refinery was planned in advance and that the target was monitored for an extended period. Ukrainian drone teams are believed to have initially carried out reconnaissance missions before launching a concentrated strike based on the intelligence they collected. In operations of this kind, the location of the target, the positioning of air defense systems, possible approach routes, the most vulnerable sections of the facility, and the most suitable time for the attack are calculated in detail. The decision to strike during the morning may also suggest that security routines, visibility conditions, and activity inside the facility were carefully evaluated. The enormous material destruction caused since the beginning of the war is also affecting Russia's influence over the global economy, particularly because oil and natural gas revenues occupy a major place in the country's financial structure. Every disruption to Russian energy infrastructure can place pressure on international oil prices, export balances, insurance costs, and transportation routes. When Russia reduces production or limits exports, the consequences affect not only Russian consumers but also countries dependent on imported energy. While the global economy continues to suffer from the instability created by the conflict, many governments have called for an immediate end to the fighting and the repeated strikes. However, the growing intensity of operations both on the battlefield and behind the front line is reducing expectations that a lasting period of calm will emerge in the near future. Russian President Vladimir Putin has not yet issued a comprehensive statement addressing every aspect of this latest attack. The Kremlin's response could take the form of expanded military operations, additional strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure, or increased protection around strategic facilities inside Russia. Oil reserves are among Russia's most important sources of power, both in military operations and in the economic and commercial fields. Ukraine's attempts to damage the refineries processing these reserves could significantly influence Russia's ability to continue the war, even if the impact is not always immediate. Throughout history, fuel has remained one of the most important elements of warfare. The movement of armies, the operation of air power, the advance of armored units, and the functioning of supply lines all depend on petroleum. A country's ability to obtain and process fuel easily provides a major advantage during prolonged conflicts. Russia is regarded as one of the strongest countries in the world in this field. Its enormous reserves, extensive production capacity, and income from energy exports have represented some of Moscow's most important advantages since the beginning of the war. However, Ukraine's strategy of targeting the refineries that transform crude oil into usable fuel, rather than focusing solely on oil fields, appears to be a calculated attempt to weaken that advantage. Expectations that this latest attack will not be the final one and that reciprocal operations will continue have created serious concern among the Russian population. Rising fuel prices, queues at petrol stations, the inability to find certain types of gasoline, and attacks reaching strategic facilities deep inside the country are making the effects of the war increasingly visible in daily life. Russia is already suffering continuous population losses while directing major military and economic resources towards the conflict. We will continue to observe how the country will be affected by this prolonged process, the response of the Putin administration, the speed at which damaged refineries can be repaired, whether Ukraine will launch further attacks, and whether the fuel crisis will spread into additional regions will remain among the most important questions of the coming period. To stay informed about the latest developments on the battlefield and behind the front line, do not forget to subscribe to the NLY Military channel and turn on video notifications.